Oui, bonjour. Donc maintenant, nous allons introduire notre prochaine interlocutrice, Victoria Hunter, qui nous vient du Royaume-Uni.
Hello.
Hello, Vicky.
Hi.
We are glad to have you with us today. Donc, on l'a présentée déjà ce matin, mais rapidement quelques mots maintenant. Victoria est une maîtresse de conférence qui est à la fois chercheuse et praticienne chorégraphe et qui développe ce qu'on appelle le site-specific dance ou side dance, c'est-à-dire une danse en situation qui va du coup lier un lien particulier avec les lieux, tels des duos de mouvements entre la terre, l'eau, le ciel. Et elle va tout de suite commencer son tour parce qu'on n'a pas trop de temps. On est un peu en retard. Thank you, Victoria, to be with us, and it's your turn.
Thank you. Can I just check that you can see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's working very well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And so thank you to the organisers, and thank you to my fellow presenters today. I've had a great time so far. I might not have picked up everything, but I'm doing my best to improve my French. So my presentation today is called Dancing the Beach, and I'm thinking about being in between land, sea and sky. So I'm never happier than when I'm at the beach, whether engaging with the kinetic pull of the water's ebb and flow or exploring the undulant shape of rock formations and boulders at one of my favourite beach locations that to me resonates with the reclined figures produced by the sculptor Henry Moore, one of my favourite artists. In particular, I'm drawn to more rugged coastal landscapes and beaches that demand attention and physical engagement. Beaches that require corporeal endeavour and adaptation, an initial morphing or acquiescing to the material conditions of the beach before a mutual settling into the contours and conditions of sight are accommodated and absorbed. Such beach sites can be found in Cornwall and Yorkshire's northeast coast in the UK, and Zakynthos in Greece's Ionian Islands' rugged coastlines, which is where these images were taken. I'm less interested in the seductive white sands of the Caribbean, for example, that offer an easy win, sites in which language such as lapping and caressing is freely employed in travel writing that alludes to the luxurious nature of such spaces as sites of repose and indulgence. But I am drawn to their expansiveness, however, and more often to the expansive nature of the beaches of the UK's North Norfolk coast, in places such as Holcombe and Cromer, and their sites not far from where Boy was filmed, at which the line between sea and sky becomes blurred and prompts a reckoning of my own human scale and form placed within these expansive vistas, horizon line married with horizon line, for example. I'm most interested in the kinetic nature of active, turbulent sites, in which a form of being at the beach is invoked through digging into sandy surfaces, picking out routes across rocky terrain, leaning into the wind, and playing with the body's sense of centre place as it is destabilised by uneven and pebbly surfaces that shift and slide under the body's upright stance, often requiring squatting, crawling, or other quadrupedal actions to emerge. Negotiating this relationship through site-based movement practice, which is the subject of my presentation today, brings these relationships of coexistence and entanglement to the fore. Site-based dance and movement practice can be defined as dance practice created and performed in situ, in response to particular sites and locations. The practice is wide-ranging and varied in terms of its aims, location and focus, from the rural to the urban, the political to the spectacle. But in this presentation, I consider how beach sites can be explored through phenomenologically informed movement inquiry. I propose that this type of work offers up other modes and ways of knowing environments and non-human components, providing additional layers of information and embodied knowledge with which to consider beaches as watery coastal places. This work demands a form of corporeal presentness, that brings us back to the body and reminds us of the similarities and synergies between our own material makeup of calcified bones and watery interiors in relation to the sedimented layers of rocks, particles of sand, and the silty porosity of seabeds intrinsic to these environments. The collection of ideas I present here today is framed by my engagement with new materialist research that entangles site-based dance and movement. To do so, I employ methodologies that work with a site as opposed to imposing an external narrative or agenda on a site through a demarcated or framed performance event per se. A brief aside. In August 2019, I found myself swimming in the Camel estuary between Rock and Padstow in Cornwall in the southwest corner of England. Due to the unusually warm weather, I found myself in the water without a wetsuit. The texture of the estuary bed beneath my feet and between my toes made me particularly conscious of the estuary's purpose and function as a watery system that filters and churns bodies of water and negotiates relationships between rivers, land, and sea. The estuary's repertoire of churn, rip, tide, and flow were made manifest through the ebb and flow of the water around my legs and through surface evidence of ripples, swirls, cross currents, and wakes. As I swam briefly in this very complex body of water, its complexity emerged for me facilitated by the view from a choreographic perspective, which for me means I am drawn to things that are mobile. I am drawn to exploring things through the choreography of things. And this, I think, is my point regarding the opportunity or perspective offered through embodied movement inquiry, conducted in particular non-theatre places or nature spaces in this context. My reflection on this experience is further informed by my reading of Astrid Onyemanis's writing on post-human hydrofeminism, and I know it's not the first time she's been mentioned today. In the introduction to her work, Bodies of Water, she articulates a position on embodiment elicited through her notion of thinking through water that comprises biological, ethical, and culturally informed perspectives in which we are, she says, made mostly of wet matter, but also swim in the discursive flocculations of embodiment as an idea. In her work, she explores the inseparability of watery bodies and the myriad, and I quote, anthropogenically exacerbated water crises faced by the planet today, such as rising sea levels, drought, flooding, and extreme weather occurrences. Drawing on feminist theories of subjectivity from Donna Haraway, Karen Barad, Stacey Alamo, and others, she espouses an entangled perspective between body and world, in which we are immersed in and ethically responsible for environmental conditions. In her writing on human, non-human watery relations and entanglements, Onyemanis reminds us that our embodiment is, quote, never really autonomous. And she says we require other bodies of waters that in turn require other bodies and other water to bathe us into being. So the current practice-led research I'm developing draws on new materialist ideas and presents suggestions and ideas for exploring how dance and movement practice might instigate corporeal dialogues between bodies and sites. And it illustrates how a choreographic disposition towards observing, intuiting, and conversing with the material world might be fostered. So I tend to work with movement scores, which are a simple set of instructions designed to lead participants and myself towards specific interactions between bodies and sites. The estuary example of ebb and flow aligns with the manner in which I articulate how this particular form of dance between or dance with the non-human or more than human occurs through attending to specific modes or ways in to instigating a particular movement conversation with the world. In particular, I'm in the research questions posed here. So what occurs when a moving dancing body becomes immersed and entangled within the beachscape? What is revealed regarding processes of being and dwelling with and in the beach? The beach as a naturally kinetic site presents movement practitioners with a challenge to engage, respond, and negotiate with a particularly active and energized environment, in contrast to the theatre, although you could argue always active and energized, but generally speaking, a theatre doesn't have those natural elements of wind and rain and all those kind of components we've been talking about today. And I equate this to a process, I equate this process to a form of movement duet in which a kinetic enmeshment between moving body and moving sight occurs. I'm intrigued by this particular form of liminal dance work, existing physically on the borders between land and sea, comprising artistically hybridized components of pedestrianism, gestural and non-stylized dance movement, situated on the threshold between choreographed dance and environmental movement practice. This work explores a form of choreographic and corporeal curiosity and a fascination with the relationship, or relationships, plural, between body and environment, flesh, sea, and sky. This approach produces spontaneous, unscripted dance, presenting an immediate unfolding of process and product, a form of choreography in the moment, an approach described by the Australian dancer researcher Gretel Taylor as dancing the place, as opposed to dancing in the place. And it's very much not dancing on a place, it is dancing the beach. It's about dancing the interaction. It's not about stomping around and kind of, imposing oneself on this site. So how this mode of exploration operates in practice is illustrated here through one of the many scores that I employ. The site score exemplifies a type of phenomenological exercise that I developed to encourage participants to take the site into the body and explore connections between body and environment. So you can see here the movers engaging with their exploration of this felt sense of a horizon line. And in the body, the horizon line is, or I work with this sense of the horizon line being just below the rib cage, the kind of shifting rib cage work that you can do with the arms outstretched or above your head or wherever you want to be. So through this process of being, noticing and responding, a form of organic movement improvisation emerges, unique to each individual, yet containing common movement themes, dynamics, speeds, pauses, shapes, and bodily movements and forms. In her paper, Beaches and Bodies, the, again, Australian creative writer Jen Webb also acknowledges the beach as a cultural construct governed by erratically enforced social rules. But through an exploration of the body as a primary form of experiential navigator in the landscape, she also identifies the beach as, and I quote, a place where the body temporarily wins the struggle between nature and culture, between social constraints and unspoken desires, end quote. Webb explores how the coastal environment invites us into an immersive experience, not offered by other everyday interactions with the world. The potential to dig into the landscape, run sand between the fingers, swim, and take the sight literally into the body is an experience not afforded in quite the same physical and experiential way by parks, rural landscapes, or cityscapes. This sense of reconnecting with organic elements of landscape and environment at the beach potentially reminds us of our own organic relationship to the world and brings us back to more fundamental bodily processes of engaging with the world through a range of sensory, visceral, and kinesthetic approaches. Returning to the notion of liminality and a consideration of the beach as a liminal place of encounter, the dance theorist Valerie Brigginshaw observes, beaches also exist between lands and seas. As shorelines, they form borders and boundaries. They are particular liminoid or in-between spaces. Approaching the beach as an in-between liminal site offers up a degree of uncertainty and opportunity for those engaging with it. The unpredictability and precarious nature of this liminal place can present the individual with new ways of experiencing and engaging with the world, and through doing so invoke newfound experiences of self-awareness and potential ways of being in the world, as Jen Webb observes. She says, think, for instance, of the peculiarly evocative relationship between the water and the edge of the land. The uncertainty and indeed the mutability of that edge's location metaphorizes the uncertainty about where the body ends and the rest of the world begins. This level of uncertainty encapsulates and amplifies the uncertainty of location, potentiality, or potentially leading to a questioning of the individual's locational fixity and the assuredness of the stability of place. Webb observes how this perceived lack of stability can be read as a metaphor for the insecurity always attached to ontological questions such as what am I and who am I? Her observation helps to position the beach as a contentious and paradoxical place, offering up opportunities for pleasure, danger, escape, and disappearance. Through the body's immersion into the sand and sea, rain and wind, and through the projection of oneself imaginatively and viscerally through the landscape into the beach presents the opportunity to metaphorically escape from oneself, and in particular the form of self practiced and performed in everyday life situations. So this idea, just to recap a little bit, this kind of one of the arguments is that we can kind of escape when we're into the beach and entering this world of a different way of knowing the world, a different mode of being in the world or being in the beach. But paradoxically, however, when engaging with the beach, we are also entering a physically unstable, dangerous place where self-preservation dictates that we do attend to ourselves to prevent sinking, drowning, stumbling, and colliding with the environment. So through this process, we are made very aware of our physical presence and its management within and negotiation of the site interaction, during which any attempt to escape from attending to our physical self, to our bodies, is prevented. So the boundaries of the body and its engagement with non-human elements in this process become fluid and permeable. Through processes of engagement and immersion within the beach, the messy materiality of the body and its insecure boundaries become exposed. The human geographer, again from Australia, Robin Longhurst, explores theories of corporeogeography when considering the body's relationship to the world. She presents the notion of the body's fluid boundaries as a challenge to ideas of fixity and impermeability between body and world, and through doing so challenges us to consider, and I quote, the runny, gaseous, flowing, watery nature of bodies. Longhurst's positioning of a porous, open body is exemplified particularly well through movement explorations that necessarily explore the messy materiality of bodies in messy coastal locations, in which water, sand, mud, slime become enmeshed, embedded, and sited both within physical entities of body and environment. Her perspective on bodily porosity chimes with Nemanis's observations regarding watery relations and transcorporeality, when she observes, a watery body sloshes and leaks, excretes and perspires. Its depths gurgle, erupt. A body of water also extends transcorporeally into other assemblages, watershed, cistern, sea, and other bodies that are human, vegetable, and hydrological. In Nemanis's writing, she reflects more generally on how artworks or creative interventions might heighten our awareness of these watery relations. She suggests that artistic and creative acts, such as writing, images, and installation performances, act as proxy stories that operate as, and I quote, avenues for desedimenting our human scaled perspective. Such artistic and imaginative acts, she argues, provide access to an embodied experience of our wateryness that might otherwise be too submerged, too subcutaneous, too repressed, or too large and distant, or even too obvious, mundane, and taken for granted to readily sense. In this discussion, I extend this notion to encompass dancing beach sites that draws attention to watery relations and human, non-human entanglements. Doing so, however, I propose a caveat that such work enacts rather than represents via proxy the enmeshed relations at hand. Through this practice, I argue that a particular form of dwelling in the beach occurs in which the dancer comes to know the site world well through detailed exploration of specific elements in which a particular experiential world is constructed. And this is a still that you see here from Amy Greenfield's movement film Tides, where the body rolls into the sea, the naked body rolls into the sea from the beach, rises up again to repeat over and over again. It's a really beautiful film. So my proposition is informed by Tim Ingold's dwelling perspective, in which he develops Heideggerian notions of dwelling and temporality in relation to human-environment relationships. In dwelling the world, he says, we do not act upon it or do things to it, rather we move along with it. Subjective processes of dwelling in the beach, invoked through improvised movement exploration, facilitate a particular form of worlding in which the mover aligns themselves with the themes and atmospheres present within a particular world, to quote Kathleen Stewart. This is facilitated by a mobile process of dwelling, in which both the body and sight are co-perceived by the dancer as they move along with the natural rhythms, contours, vistas, and directions of the site. Merleau-Ponty's notion of le chiasme enables us to identify in this context an intertwining between body and world through an engagement within an interstitial territory in which body, self, and sight become entwined, overlap, and engage in a messy exchange facilitated by a process of reversibility. In The Visible and Invisible, he describes this process, saying, once a body-world relationship is recognized, there's a ramification of my body and a ramification of the world, and a correspondence between its inside and my outside, between my inside and its outside. In this practice, the movement practice I'm talking about, the mover needs to remain open, present, and aware of the body in sight, and to respond instinctively through a form of pre-reflective practice, in which their sense of self is nevertheless present. The resulting movement content is not, therefore, empirically representative of the environment, but instead expresses the mover's visceral and embodied response to the world and its material in abstract form, coloured and flavoured by their lived experience of sight. So whilst I began this research with an aim to corporeally find a way into the beach site and employ a range of scores to help facilitate exploration, what also emerges for some participants is an expression of emotional experiences encountered both during and following the movement episodes. The horizon line exploration score presented earlier at the start of this talk was particularly noteworthy in terms of the range of emotions evoked, revealed through post-practice discussions with participants. A number of dancers reported feelings of trepidation or melancholy and unease during the practice, while others recalled feelings of elation, potentiality, and kind of import, reflecting a wide range of emotional resonances mirroring the epic scale of the horizon line encountered, experienced in this work. And what I'm going to try and do now is share my screen with you and show you a little bit of footage, if I can get that to work. So here we go.
I am Claudia Lai, and I came as a dancer to this workshop. The workshop facilitator told us to focus on horizon, perspective, connection. Then I just let myself go and let myself be moved by it. I've lived here in the north of England for 14 years now, and I've never dared go into the sea and swim because it's too cold. And I think that the way to swim in this sea is maybe to dance into the sea, and then maybe I'll get into the water. It's liberating. It's just what the doctor ordered. I'm going through a difficult period in life. My dad has just passed away last month. I have been in Argentina to be with him, so I thought that's just what I need to dance. This is like my offering to him this weekend. So it's perfect.
So a very short example there. So, to theorize these responses, and there are other responses in other films, and for time reasons, I won't show you any more just yet. But to theorize these responses, it's useful to return to Ingold's dwelling perspective, a viewpoint that alludes to a type of subject-environment relationship in which sights are experienced in a significant manner, infused with memories, associations, and effects, through which a deep-seated sense of connectivity develops. He proposes that all perceptual encounters with landscape are informed by the experience's inherent awareness of the past histories, activities, and lives of previous site inhabitants in relation to our own histories. He observes to perceive the landscape is therefore to carry out an act of remembrance. And remembering is not so much a matter of calling up an internal image stored in the mind, as of engaging perceptually with an environment that is itself pregnant with the past. Whilst Ingold applies his perspective to a broader discussion of landscape archaeology and anthropology, I'm suggesting here that in this practice, a dwelling perspective informed by a subjective awareness of past activity and a sense of ontological lineage encountered at the beach coexists with a more subjective felt sense of historicity. In the movement-based beach site exploration process, this may inform the performer's corporeal sense of engagement and emotional connection with the beach site in a more individualized and subjective manner through a form of embodied memory that in turn invokes real-time emotional response. So through this discussion, I argue that the practice reveals the multiplicitous nature of the beach site, and through doing so highlights the complexity of human processes of engaging with coastal locations. Through phenomenologically based movement inquiry, the practice enables individuals to engage with many layers and nuances of coastal landscapes. These components include formal, tangible elements of sand, sea, rock faces, and precipices, encountered alongside more informal site components of rhythm, texture, speed, distance, and scale, experienced subjectively by the perceiver. In this sense, the practice constitutes a mobile process of collage, in which multiplicities of inside, outside, space, time, memory, emotion, and effect assemble, dissolve, and reassemble through the dancer's motion and motility. Through phenomenological movement inquiry, participants are able to immerse themselves corporeally within this multiplicitous encounter and to play along with, question, explore, and work through a range of embodied responses encountered in the moment of interaction. How we live on, live with, and engage with beaches can be explored and contemplated through this practice that promotes a freeing up of behaviour and a space for contemplating and enacting human, non-human interactions and embodied imaginaries. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Vicky.